seated.
Thank you, Your Honour. Your Honour and Commissioners, at the commencement of this hearing, I provided some of the results from the analysis.
Not sure you can be heard by everyone at the moment.
Is that better?
Yeah. Let's try again.
At the commencement of this hearing,
Yeah.
I provided some of the results from the analysis of Catholic Church authorities' data about claims made to them in relation to child sexual abuse. I will shortly tender the entire report. As I set out last week, the claims survey was carried out with the assistance of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council and the Catholic Church authorities who provided their data about claims of child sexual abuse. And as I indicated then, the Royal Commission is grateful for their assistance. This survey gathered information about the extent of claims of child sexual abuse made against Catholic Church personnel, including any current or former priest, religious brother or sister, or any other person employed in or appointed to a voluntary position by a Catholic Church authority. The data collected included all claims of child sexual abuse, including those that were ongoing, settled, discontinued, concluded without redress, or not accepted by the authority. The data provided in the report does not record the total number of allegations of child sexual abuse made to Catholic Church authorities in Australia. The survey was confined to seeking information about claims where the claimant had sought redress or complaints that were accepted, although redress had not been sought. The Royal Commission's experience is that many survivors face barriers which deter them from reporting abuse to authorities and to the institution in which the abuse occurred. Accordingly, the total number of incidences of child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church institutions in Australia is likely to be greater than the claims made. I indicated last week that the Council engaged a statistician to ensure the accuracy of the analysis conducted by the Royal Commission's independent data analysts. Discussions between the Council's statistician and those data experts engaged by the Commission have been ongoing since late 2016. Those discussions have resulted in one more claim being identified, taking the number of people who have made such a claim to 4,445. The claims data sought information about claims received in the period 1980 to 2015. For a claim to be included in the survey, the claimant must have approached the relevant Catholic Church authority in this time period. However, there was no time limitation in relation to the date of the alleged incidents of abuse. The earliest incidence of alleged abuse reported in a claim to a Catholic Church authority was in the 1920s, and the latest was after 2010. Between January 1980 and February 2015, 4,445 people alleged incidents of child sexual abuse in 4,765 claims. The vast majority of claims alleged abuse that has started in the period 1950 to 1989 inclusive. The largest proportion of first alleged incidents of child sexual abuse, 29%, occurred in the 1970s. As I indicated earlier, the average time between the alleged abuse and the date a claim was made was 33 years. The Christian Brothers, the De La Salle Brothers, the Maris Brothers, the Patrician Brothers and the St John of God Brothers, each of which has only religious brother members, made up only 5% of all of the Catholic Church authorities which received any claims. However, of all the claims which were made to authorities, 41% were received by these 5 mail orders. Archdioceses and dioceses made up 33% of all Catholic Church authorities which received any claims. Of all the claims which were made to authorities, archdioceses and dioceses received 37%. Female religious institutes with religious sister members made up 28% of Catholic Church authorities that received any claims of child sexual abuse. And yet, of all the claims which were made to authorities, they received only 9%. The claims of child sexual abuse identified 1,049 separate Catholic Church institutions. The most common institution type identified in claims was schools. They were identified in 46% of all claims, almost half. Children's orphanages or residential facilities were identified in 29% of all claims. The highest number of claims of child sexual abuse concerned a residential care facility operated by the De La Salle brothers in Beaudesert in Queensland. There were 219 claims relating to alleged child sexual abuse at this institution. The claim survey sought information about the outcomes provided to people who made claims, including the number of people who received monetary compensation and the amount of monetary compensation paid. Overall, 3,066 claims of child sexual abuse resulted in a payment being made following a claim for redress. 2,854 of these claims resulted in monetary compensation. A significant number of claims were ongoing at the time of the survey. Overall, Catholic Church authorities paid $276.1 million in response to claims of child sexual abuse received between 1 January 1980 and 28 February 2015. That sum include amounts for compensation, treatment, legal and other costs. Of the total amount, $258.8 million was monetary compensation, at an average of about $91,000 per claim. The Christian Brothers, who at the relevant time operated a number of residential facilities, reported the highest number of payments. This order of brothers made 763 payments, amounting to $48.5 million, with an average payment of about $64,000. Of those Catholic Church authorities that made at least 10 payments, the Jesuits reported the highest average payment at about $257,000 per payment. The most commonly used redress process was towards healing, with 40% of claims going through this scheme. Of all redress processes, the Melbourne response had the highest proportion of claims resulting in monetary compensation. 324 claims, or 84% of all Melbourne response claims, resulted in monetary compensation. Of all the redress processes used by claimants, the highest amount of monetary compensation paid was through civil proceedings at $96.6 million. Other redress processes, which might include a direct approach by a claimant or their solicitor to a church authority, resulted in monetary compensation payments of $93.1 million. The highest average monetary compensation paid was about $151,000 per complainant and was through civil proceedings. Last week I tendered a document that set out the proportion of priest and religious members of Catholic Church authorities who ministered in the period 1950 to 2010 and were alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse. That statistical analysis adopts the weighted average methodology. When they were engaged to carry out the analysis, The data experts engaged by the Royal Commission advised the Royal Commission that the weighted average methodology should be used as it properly takes into account the risk to children and is the statistically appropriate methodology for calculating proportions over a period of 6 decades. The Royal Commission has received a number of inquiries regarding the weighted average methodology. By way of explanation, that methodology takes into account how long alleged perpetrators were in ministry in the period 1950 to 2010, compared with how long all members of the relevant Catholic Church authority were in ministry over this 60-year period. Those who ministered for less time are likely to have come into contact with fewer children and over time posed less potential risk to children than those who ministered for a longer period of time. The weighted average approach ensures that each person is weighted according to their duration of ministry. The Truth, Justice and Healing Council was provided with the methodology analysis and results in November and December last year, and the Royal Commission has received no objection to the use of this methodology. The Royal Commission calculated the proportion of priest and religious members of the Catholic Church authorities who ministered in that period, 1950 to 2010, who were alleged perpetrators of sexual abuse, relative to the total number of priest and religious members who ministered during the same period, taking into account the duration of ministry that was in accordance with the weighted average methodology. The proportions were calculated using that methodology, which ensures that a statistically consistent approach is taken to individuals who were in ministry for only a few years and individuals who were in ministry for decades. For example, if a weighted average approach was not used, a priest who ministered for only 5 years in that period would be counted in exactly the same way, that is, given the same weight, as a priest who ministered for 50 years in this period. As I said, those who ministered for less time are likely to have come into contact with fewer children and over time posed less potential risk to children than those who have ministered for a longer period of time. The weighted average methodology also permits an appropriate comparison between priests and religious who ministered recently with those who ministered many decades ago, because it accounts for the tendency for priests and religious who ministered recently to have a shorter duration of ministry than those who ministered decades ago. The weighted average methodology further permits an appropriate comparison between different Catholic Church authorities where there are different average periods of ministry for all members of each Catholic Church authority. This methodology results in a lower proportion of alleged perpetrators when the average duration of ministry for alleged perpetrators is shorter than the average duration of ministry of all priests, compared with a calculation that does not account for those differing durations. For example, for the Archdiocese of Adelaide, using the weighted average methodology, the proportion of priests who ministered in the period from 1950 to 2010 who were alleged perpetrators is 2.4%. That's with the methodology. This proportion is obtained by weighing the service of the 229 priests who served in that archdiocese with that of the 10 alleged perpetrators, and that resulted in 2.4%. Without weighing duration of ministry, the proportion of alleged perpetrators rises to 4.1%. The weighted average methodology results in a higher proportion of alleged perpetrators when the average duration of ministry for alleged perpetrators is longer than the average duration of ministry for all other priests and religious in that authority, compared with a calculation that does not account for differing durations. For example, the Archdiocese of Melbourne, using the weighted average methodology, the proportion of priests who ministered in that period of 60 years who were alleged perpetrators is 8.1%. This proportion is obtained by weighing the service of the 842 priests who served in that archdiocese and that of the 58 alleged perpetrators. Without weighing duration of ministry, the proportion of alleged perpetrators is 6.9%. In the case of the St John of God brothers, using the weighted average methodology, the proportion of brothers who ministered in the period from 1950 to 2010 who were alleged perpetrators is 40.4%. This proportion is obtained by weighing the service of the 113 brothers who served in that order and that of the 34 alleged perpetrators. Without weighing duration of ministry, the proportion of alleged perpetrators is 30.4%. In summary, the weighted average approach was used because it is the most appropriate method for calculating the proportion of priest and religious members of these Catholic Church authorities who ministered in the period from 1950 to 2010 and who were alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse relative to the total number of priests and religious who ministered during that same period for the following reasons. Firstly, it takes into account the relative risk to children of individuals who have ministered for different periods of time. Secondly, it ensures a statistically consistent approach is taken to individuals who have ministered for different periods of time. Thirdly, it takes into account differing average durations of ministry over a period of 6 decades. And finally, it enables the comparison of Catholic Church authorities which have different average periods of ministry. Your Honour, I tender the report, Analysis of Claims of Child Sexual Abuse Made with Respect to Catholic Church Institutions in Australia.
I think we're up to number 7, is that right? Exhibit 57, yes. We'll mark it in that way.
Thank you. And in addition, Your Honour, I tender a document which sets out the manner in which the proportions have been calculated using the weighted average methodology and a non-weighted methodology for each Catholic Church authority referred to in the report which I have just tendered.
We'll call that the explanation document. It'll become Exhibit 50/8.
Thank you. Your Honour, my friend Mr Free will be taking the panel in relation to the Catholic Education Office. Might I be excused?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Your Honour.
There are 4 witnesses, I assume.
There are, Your Honour.
Each of you needs to be sworn. Would you all take an oath on the Bible? Yes. Would you all stand for me, please? There should be a Bible there for each of you, or you can share them. But you each need, yes, to have your hand on the Bible and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
That the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat. Yes, Mr.
Thank you. Dr McDonald, can I start with you, please? Can you state your full name?
Dr. Tim McDonald.
Thank you. And Dr McDonald, you have been involved in Catholic education since 1992, is that right?
I've had a break, Mr. Free. I worked in the UK for 4.5 years and then worked as an academic at Edith Cowan University for 9.5 years before coming back in to Catholic education.
Thank you. While you were in the UK, you also undertook a doctorate in education, is that right?
Yes, I did. I was working with 14 to 16-year-olds who were excluded from mainstream schooling I worked with them in a special unit, and then I did my doctoral studies on those students.
Thank you. When did you start work with the Catholic Education Office in Western Australia?
In 2011.
Thank you. What was your position then?
I came in as Assistant Director, People and Organisational Services.
Thank you. And you've more recently become the Executive Director?
Correct, in November 2012.
Thank you. And that's the position you're still in?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr Hill, can I turn to you, please? Can you state your full name?
Peter Anthony Hill.
Thank you. You have been involved in Catholic education since the 1990s, is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. And
A bit like Mr McDonald, I had a break for about 4 years where I worked with Mater Health Services.
thank you. What were you doing for Mater Health Services?
My role there was Executive Director of Mission Leadership.
Thank you. You've been the principal of St Ignatius School in Toowong, is that right?
That's correct.
And you became the Executive Director of Schools in the Diocese of Bathurst in 2008, is that right?
That's correct.
How long did you serve in that position?
Approximately 4 years.
And you then moved to the Brisbane Catholic Education Office.
That's correct.
What position do you hold up there?
I hold the position of Director of Employee Services.
Thank you. Is that the most senior position in the Catholic Education Office there?
No, it is not. I report to the Executive Director.
Thank you. Mr Elder, can I turn to you, please? Can you state your full name?
Yes, Stephen Noel Mackenzie Elder.
Thank you. How long have you been involved in the Catholic education system?
Since 2001 in the Central Office, and in 1988 I taught in a Catholic school for a year and a half.
Thank you. So from 2001, what was your role in the Catholic Education Office?
Initially I came to the office as, in modern language, it was Director of Infrastructure and Planning within the office.
Thank you. You subsequently moved on to become the Director of Catholic Education, is that right?
That's correct.
That was for 5 years or so, from 2006.
Correct.
And then you became the Executive Director in 2011.
Yes. I'm the Catholic Education Office Melbourne and Executive Director of the Catholic Education Commission Victoria.
Thank you. And you're also a member of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council, is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. Mr Crowley, can I turn to you, please? Can you state your full name?
John Stephen Crowley.
And you've been a teacher or principal in the Catholic system since 1993?
That's correct. Yep.
You've been the principal of 2 different schools, is that right, Mr Crowley?
Yes, Marion College in Ararat and St Patrick's College in Ballarat.
And that's the position you're in at the moment, principal of St Patrick's College in Ballarat?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr Crowley. Dr McDonald, can I come to you, please? We have the benefit of a statement from the Archbishop of your Archdiocese describing some of the arrangements in relation to Catholic education. I take it you've read that?
Yes.
Thank you. It indicates that, just trying to understand the responsibilities and delegations, that under canon law the diocesan bishop has responsibility for Catholic schools in the diocese. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And now that includes schools run by religious institutes?
In Western Australia, Mr Fred, there's 4. Catholic education takes the whole state. There are 4 dioceses: Kimberley, Geraldton, the Southwood Bunbury and the Archdiocese of Perth. Those 4 dioceses come under one commission, Catholic Education Commission of Western Australia. All 163 schools in Western Australia come under the Commission for Policy.
Thank you. And that includes schools owned by religious institutes?
Yes.
And run by them to some degree?
Yes, they follow sequit policy.
Thank you. And is that a mix of what has been referred to in the material as public juridic persons and religious institutes as the owners of those schools?
Yes.
In the case of those religious institute schools, do they look after the hiring of staff for the schools?
Yes.
Just coming back to the administration, the body you've described, the Catholic Education Commission, that works by way of a delegation from the 4 bishops.
That's correct.
And it's a delegation of general responsibility for education.
Yes, a whole range of responsibilities for policy development and Catholic identity and the running of good schools across the state.
And that body produces policy documents?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And one of those which has been referred to is Policy Statement 2D/3, Child Protection.
That's correct.
Is that the main policy that applies in Western Australia governing child protection issues in schools?
Yes, it does. It's also covered through the Complaints and Disputes Resolution policy and also unsatisfactory performance. But child protection is the main umbrella one.
Thank you. And so your office, the Catholic Education Office, operates in a statewide way.
Yes, it does.
Can you just explain what its responsibilities are and how it works with the Commission?
Mr. Free, the office is like the executive arm of Commission. We have an office centrally and also regional office. So every diocese has a regional office which assists in the administration and the policy deployment through those regions.
Thank you. I just want to drill down into some of the arrangements relating to the reporting of allegations of abuse that arise in schools, in particular child sexual abuse. Now there is, I've referred already to the policy statement 2D/3, and it in turn refers to various legal obligations to report, including under the State Education Act.
Yes.
Now, the State Education Act of Western Australia requires that the Director General of the Department of Education be notified of any critical incident. Is that right?
The Director General of the Department of Education Services, yes, correct. So any critical incident that happens in a school we have a system agreement with the government, with the Minister, that's administered through the Department of Education Services. In that system agreement, there are standards that we have to meet. Standard number 12 is around child protection, and part of that is reporting any critical incidents that happen in our schools get sent off to the department.
Yeah. And is that managed at the school level by the principal or by the office?
The school will inform us of the critical incident. It is formatted, filled in at the office, and then I sign every critical incident that is sent off to the Director General.
Thank you. How many, I'm sorry, I'll withdraw that. Can you just give an indication to the Commissioners the capacities in which priests and religious are involved in providing education services in Western Australian schools?
We have no principals that are priest or religious in Western Australian schools, and we would have very few religious working in Catholic schools in Western Australia at the moment.
You have some?
Yes, there's a Servite brother, and we have works in a school, and then in our offices we will have some religious sisters that work on professional development in the regions.
So in terms of teachers in schools, are there any religious brothers or sisters?
For diocesan schools, to the best of my knowledge, no, but I couldn't be definitive around the religious institute schools.
Thank you. Are you aware of what the reporting arrangements are if an incident occurs involving a priest or a religious at a school?
To the best of my knowledge, that's referred to the Professional Standards Office and in the Archdiocese or Diocese. Yes.
Sorry, could I just, Mr. Free, go back to a previous question? As I understand it, in both religious and secular schools, there's a federally funded system of visiting chaplains, and they teach religious education. So would it be true that priests and brothers are teaching religious education under that scheme in your schools?
Thank you, Ryan. No, the chaplaincy, most of those chaplains, if not nearly all, or not all, aren't religious. They would be lay chaplains, and we only have a small number of use of that money.
So you don't have Catholic priests or religious teaching as chaplains in your schools?
If a school has a chaplain that is the bishop is allowed to have it, they need to ask the bishop, can that priest be appointed as a chaplain? If not, the chaplaincy is usually done by the parish priest or the parish that the school is in.
So does that mean there are none or there are some?
There are some.
Thank you.
You have a number of parish schools that are on the grounds of parish churches?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So there are schools that will share the same grounds as where the priest is living?
Yes.
And I think you indicated a moment ago that your understanding of the reporting obligations is that if a complaint arose involving a priest, if I can focus on that example, a diocesan priest, the requirement is that that report goes to the Professional Standards Office of the diocese.
And we would also be informed. If it was within the school, then yes, they would report to us, and also we would refer, or they would refer to the Professional Standards Office.
What role does the Catholic Education Office then have in dealing with that complaint?
Other than subject expertise and knowledge, informing what the best practice or approach could be. But if it's with the professional standards, then it's with professional standards. It's not, we don't take charge of it.
Do you act as a conduit between the school and the Professional Standards Office?
Yes, absolutely. We work for the same employer, and we have an MOU of sharing information with the aim is what is the best outcome for the young person involved, irrespective of where information is coming from. We work very much in sharing a more almost like a case management approach as we work in the office.
But in that scenario, the Catholic Education Office itself doesn't have any investigative role in dealing with the complaint?
No.
And no decision-making role?
Not officially, but we would be involved in it, yes. So if it was a diocese, a parish priest, then we would be involved, hopefully, in the outcome. If it informed or impacted upon the school, then we would do our own, what's the risk to the students in that school, and we would advise accordingly. So, for example, when a recent case, we advised strongly that the parish priest be shifted until an investigation is completed from their residence, because they were so close to students, and the order, the religious order of priests, complied with that, and the person was moved on our advice.
So this is advice you provide to the order in that instance, which is
correct.
Primarily dealing with the complaint?
Yes, correct.
And if it was a diocesan priest, it would be advice you'd be giving to the diocesan authorities?
And to the bishop.
Thank you. Is that the limit of what the office can do if you perceive that a matter is not being dealt with appropriately by the professional standards authorities? That is, to give your input?
Or speak directly to the bishop and share our concerns about the process.
Thank you.
And if the bishop didn't respond positively to your advice, what would you do?
Reassert the advice, go back to the child, that there are children at risk, and it's our strongest view that some action needs to be taken.
And again, if the bishop didn't take the advice, what do you do?
Your Honour, that hasn't happened as yet, and I'm not too sure.
Is it your experience, Dr. McDonald, that the community comes to you in that scenario to find out what's happening with the complaint?
Yes, they do. They come to the school.
And, yes. And does the school tend to refer them to you, or do you just relay messages back through the school?
We would form more communication through the school to the school community, because they know their community best, but we would support them with the communication strategy or plan out there.
Thank you. And just changing the terms of the hypothetical a little, if you were dealing with a member of a religious order rather than a diocesan priest, would it be the same arrangements as you've been describing, but any representations you would make would be to the provincial?
To the congregational leader, yes.
Yes. Thank you. Western Australia has a system of registration of teachers, is that right?
Correct.
If a religious brother or sister was a teacher in a school within Western Australia, are they required to have the same registration?
Yes, exactly.
And is there a disciplinary system administered by the Western Australian Department in relation to that registration that means they undertake their own investigations?
Yes, there is, yes, and they can be struck off for punishments, yes.
Thank you. And Dr McDonald, are you aware of the new body which is being developed by the Church called Catholic Professional Standards?
Limited knowledge.
Yes. Are you aware of any changes it's going to introduce, either in terms of your institutional arrangements or the details of your policies?
I'm unsure, Mr. Free.
Thank you. Who employs the principal and the staff of schools in Western Australia?
In their EBA and common deed of principals, it's the bishop of the diocese who's the employer, and that authority has been delegated to me for principals, so I'm responsible for the appointment and the performance review of principals, and the principal has delegated authority to employ teachers in their school.
Thank you. And in religious institute schools, how does the arrangement work?
So in EREA or Mercy Education Limited, it'll be through that body that is the employing authority.
Of both principals and teachers?
Principal, yes.
What about any other religious institutes? Are there any others that operate in Western Australia?
Yes, we have. So there'll be 9 authorities. So there's Mercy Education Limited. There is Evan Rice Education Australia, the Servite Fathers. There's the Oblates for Mazenod, and the Presentation Sisters.
And the arrangement in relation to each of them is the same as you described for the EREA?
Correct. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr McDonald.
Could I just ask a question? You mentioned before critical incidents. If the critical incidence occurs in those 9 religious schools, independent schools, are you notified of them?
Yes, they come under our system agreement, Your Honour. So we have a system agreement with the government, and all of the schools come under that because the system agreement is with SEQA as the governing body, and they all come under our policies.
Can I just get some sense, and you may not have the exact numbers, but roughly what sort of numbers of critical incidents would you report on an annualised basis in rough terms?
I haven't got the figures. I can get them for you. To give an idea of that, probably we're over-reporting in our critical incidents at the moment. We have a new standard that in 2017, and I think that has more fine-grained and given more detail as to what a critical incident is. So it could be a student having asthma attack, a staff member falling over a bag, up to very serious things.
But roughly what number? Have you got any sort of estimate?
I couldn't accurately, Your Honour.
And all of those those critical incidents include incidents that relate to sexual abuse, including child-on-child or
Yes.
child sexual abuse generally?
Yes.
And have you got any understanding of the sort of magnitude of those sorts of complaints relative to the total?
Not evidence or fact. I could give an opinion since I signed them all. Very few.
But some?
Yes.
Thanks.
Dr McDonald, do you have much interaction with the Catholic education officers in other states?
Limited, according to need, really. Yes.
What need might arise that would cause you to interact with other officers?
If it's not me, it would be directors of the executive on their various areas of expertise, whether it's around professional standards, curriculum, around IT, could be around funding, how did you work with the government, how do you design new schools, a whole range of where we'd look to learn, really, to see what others are doing around Australia.
On the topic of professional standards and reporting, do you have a view on whether there is any need, from your perspective, for greater coordination between officers within the country?
I think it would be wonderful if there was a seamless transmission of information and knowledge as an outcome.
Thank you. If you are dealing with a complaint, and say in the scenario I raised with you earlier, or that His Honour raised with you, where there's a view that you've formed within the office that action needs to be taken, and a concern might arise that the bishop or the superior is not taking that action, do you investigate the history of the priest or religious?
If I just give some background to that, Mr. Freeze, that in 2012, when I came into the role, I wanted to understand the reality of what I was taking over. And being a father of 5 children in Catholic schools at the time, 4 still in Catholic schools at the moment, I couldn't hand on heart say that those children are safe and who are the people they're working with. So I asked for a review of any file that we had around any harm to a child. So we reviewed 4,300 files. And why I mention that, because it's very informative to our practice. And I think what we learned from that is that we now have aggregated files. We now have a new template for electronic retrieval. We then have worked from the lessons from those files that we work in a case management approach. And so when an incident happens, we would bring the people that need to be around the table. So we'd bring we have 3 lawyers working in our community engagement employee services. We'd bring our psychologists, we would bring our other consultants around, and then we would do as much information as we can around that particular incident with the view of who's at risk, is the child safe, what do we need to do in the immediate, and then what do we need to do in the investigation.
So that system allows you to identify any material that might be in that individual's file, whether it be a teacher or a volunteer or a priest or religious, that might have a bearing on any risks they pose?
Yes.
Sorry, the 4,300 files, do they represent students?
Sorry, teachers. They were personnel files, HR files, other files that we could get. It took us back 30 years to 1978, and we identified what were the practices, how were complaints dealt with, so that we could come up with what I believe is a more thorough process that clearly puts the child at the centre.
So the nature of the aggregated data that you spoke of, is that data that broke down various aspects of the staff's history into the nature of incidents that had been reported?
Or it gave us what was the file note at the time, what was the telephone, what was any notes that happened around that particular issue that we could get.
And with respect to allegations of child sexual abuse, are you able to enlighten us with respect to what you found?
We had about 598 out of those 4,300 files had some case of harm to a child, and of that, 243, about 40%, were of a sexual nature. And then, at the request of the Royal Commission, we submitted that there were 75 substantiated cases in that data.
Dr. McDonald, do I take it from what you're describing that before you undertook this project, that kind of information had not been brought together in files in this way?
I think the lesson was that we needed a central repository of files that needed to have a good Dewey system, a good retrieval process to do that, and that enables us now to search, to be far more agile and to get information that we need to make better judgments.
You must have a lot of teachers and others in the system who've done work interstate.
Yes.
What arrangements are there to find out about relevant information that might be in files in other places in Australia, outside Western Australia, about either teachers or priests or religious?
I'm unsure that we would go to the other CEOs and ask about files, but the normal arrangements around working with Children Check, police clearance, any staff member working. So we would go through our own checks and balances and then also have a look at any files that we might have if they worked initially for us and then left and then came back.
Thank you. So the working with children checks are mandatory for any teachers that you employ, is that right?
That's correct.
And volunteers who are doing work in schools?
Yes, and contractors that work in the schools, yes.
Thank you.
And chaplains?
Yes.
What about parish priests who are living on school grounds but not engaged as either a chaplain or a teacher?
Living on the grounds, they'll be in the presbytery next to the parish. If there's a school there, it'll be a parish school. And my understanding is that all the people have a working with children check.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr McDonald. Mr Hill, can I turn to you, please, and ask you some questions to understand how things work in Brisbane. Now, as I understand it, there is a statewide Catholic Education Commission, is that right?
That is correct.
And that, in a similar way, has worked by a delegation of the Bishops of Queensland jointly.
That's right.
Thank you. And also the leaders of the religious institutes in Queensland.
That's correct.
What's the function of the Commission?
The Queensland Catholic Education Commission is strategic. It's involved with policy making, strategy for all Catholic schools in Queensland. It also disperses funding for Catholic schools in Queensland.
Does it have a policy-making role in relation to the matters we've been focusing on, reporting of complaints and handling of complaints?
Yes, it does. And for 5 years, I chaired a group called the Student Protection Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the Commission.
And did it draft policies?
It did, and those policies were resources to assist schools in their own policy making.
Thank you. So, just coming down to the next administrative level, within Queensland there are 5 different Catholic education authorities, is that right?
Diocese, that's correct.
So each diocese has its own Catholic education office?
That's right.
And focusing on the Brisbane Catholic Education Office, can you just explain what its function is?
Certainly. Firstly, it's a function of the Archdiocese, so it belongs to the Corporation of the Trustees of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Brisbane, and the delegated authority from the Archbishop to the Executive Director binds Brisbane Catholic Education. That delegated authority then enables the Executive Director to employ staff and make decisions pertaining to Catholic education.
So the employment of staff is of both principals and other staff within schools?
That's correct.
There's also a body within Brisbane called the Brisbane Catholic Education Council, is that right?
That's right.
What do they do?
That's established by the Archbishop of Brisbane, and they are a governing body to assist the Executive Director in both the leadership, management and operations of the 139 schools in the Archdiocese of Brisbane, and the Executive Director is an executive officer of that group.
Thank you. Can I ask about the 139 schools? Do you have religious brothers and sisters teaching in those schools?
Not teaching per se. We have one principal who's a religious woman, and we would have approximately a dozen religious women who would be in the role of a school pastoral worker role, but not teachers per se.
Okay. Are they treated as employees of the office?
Yes, they are, and because they are employees, they're covered by the same policies and procedures relating to student protection.
Thank you. So no religious brothers in any roles within the Brisbane Archdiocese?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll reserve my position on that if you don't mind, Mr. Free. There could be, but I don't think so.
Thank you. What about diocesan priests? What role, if any, do they play in schools in the Brisbane Archdiocese?
They're not working in schools. They are obviously doing pastoral work in parishes and are an integral role in terms of our parish schools, in particular our 105 primary schools. Very important role in terms of the faith community of those parish schools. and depending on the skills, talents and attributes of the parish priest, will work with that community in a pastoral way.
And is it the same arrangement there that for those 105 primary schools, the presbytery and the school are in the same place?
Sometimes is the correct answer. It depends on the living arrangements for the parish priest. The parish priest will reside in presbytery. That will be, it may or may not be necessarily close to the church, but it may be in close proximity to the church and the school.
Thank you. Now, the policies that apply to the schools in the Brisbane Archdiocese in relation to handling complaints of child sexual abuse, are they statewide policies or are they at the diocesan level?
The policies are at an archdiocesan level. The legislation that requires us to have those policies, which is quite voluminous, in the state of Queensland, there are a number of pieces of legislation that require us to have those policies and procedures, are statewide.
Thank you.
And sorry, Mr. Free,
yes.
The Queensland Catholic Education Commission also has template documents that schools can use to assist in the population of those policies.
Thank you. And the policies give effect to state legislation which requires some reports to be made to the police, is that
yes,
right?
That's correct.
And what are the criteria that mean you have to report to the police?
Any staff member is required to report any knowledge of sexual abuse or likely sexual abuse.
Thank you. And does that also prompt a report to the Department of Community Services?
It will, because there's harm done to the child.
What involvement does the Education Office have in that process?
A very critical one. We conduct a team of skilled practitioners who are our student protection team. There are 4 members of that team who will take intake calls from principals or any member of staff for that matter, provide advice to those principals and staff. We also facilitate our student protection case management system, which is an enterprise system that records all data pertaining to records of concern involving both sexual abuse, likely sexual abuse and harm, and any other incidents that staff are concerned about in relation to their behaviour.
Thank you. Do you have a file management system of the kind that Dr McDonald described that has consolidated all of the information available about those in the Archdiocese?
Not exactly what Dr McDonald described, but our student protection case management system is an enterprise system. So it's both a repository as well as a reporting system. It's quite sophisticated, which enables us to provide data to the Executive Director on a monthly and quarterly basis that she would then provide to the Council and to the Archbishop, providing data around the number of reports and the type of reports that are occurring, particularly to child sexual abuse. So it's slightly different to what Dr McDonald described.
Thank you. And can I ask the same question about interstate staff? If you've had people in your schools who have worked interstate, are you aware of any resources that would enable you to find out about any relevant information from their past in other states?
Similar to the colleagues in Western Australia, in the state of Queensland, we have the Queensland College of Teachers. It's a requirement that any teacher working in Queensland needs to be registered with the college, so we rely on registration with the college. In addition to that, we train our principals as recruiters in our schools of teachers to be very prudent in terms of checking registration. If they're not a teacher, that they have a Working with Children blue card. In addition to that, paying particular attention to referee checking and the most current and recent line manager for that particular teacher.
Thank you. And I understand that part of the reporting regime is that if a complaint does relate to a teacher, the principal is obliged to notify the College of Teachers. Is that right?
We do that on behalf of the principal. So we have a requirement, I think, under Section 76 of the Education Queensland College of Teachers Act that requires us, as soon as we have knowledge of a matter involving students and child protection, to report that matter to the college. That's correct.
Thank you. Now, does the Brisbane Catholic Education Office have an investigative role in dealing with complaints?
Yes, we do.
When do you undertake the investigations?
Could I just check, do you mean in relation to student protection matters?
Yes, sorry, yes.
When we become aware of that matter, and so there may be, it depends on the type of complaint. If we have knowledge of that, we would respond in a number of ways. The first would be very swiftly to make an assessment of the situation, to do a factual report of what has occurred in relation to that particular complaint and the severity of the complaint. If it was a very severe complaint involving any member of staff, that staff member would be immediately stood down and pending a particular investigation. If it involved less severe complaints, then that investigation might occur with one of the staff from the Brisbane Catholic Education Office, and they would again gather information to assist us in resolving that complaint and bringing it to conclusion. Or if it was an ongoing matter that required more expertise, we might recruit an external investigator with appropriate qualifications. Generally speaking, an investigator we would recruit would have as a minimum qualification a certificate in investigations.
Thank you. And if the matter is under investigation by police, do the two investigations go on side by side?
No, they do not. One of the things that we are very pleased to have is a good and healthy relationship both with the Queensland Police Service and the Department of Communities, and we work very closely with both of those agencies, and there is no way that we would contaminate a police investigation while it was occurring, and we would wait for any matter to be involving the police to conclude before we would commence any of our own investigations.
So what delineates the difference between when the investigation is conducted inside your office as opposed to being reported directly to the police?
Your Honour, it doesn't meet the threshold for reporting according to the provisions that exist in the Education General Provisions Act or the Child Protection Act.
Are your teachers and principals instructed to report to the Catholic Education Office as well as directly to police with respect to their reporting responsibilities?
That is correct, and so if I could respond, first and foremost, when a record of concern is completed by a principal in relation to a student, that record is sent electronically to the Queensland Police Service, and the principal will then telephone the Queensland Police Service to ensure they've received that report and follow it up. And then we would act on behalf of that principal in terms of following up those matters with the police as well.
Can I ask you, Mr Hill, to consider a scenario where there's a complaint involving let's deal first with a diocesan priest, and assume it doesn't breach the threshold of a police report, or the police say they've looked at it and they're not going to investigate further. How is a complaint of that kind processed?
That complaint may come to either myself or the Executive Director. The Executive Director or myself would then work with either the Vicar General or the Archbishop directly, and also include the Queensland Office of Professional Standards in relation to the management of that complaint.
Would the Catholic Education Office's investigative process apply in that scenario?
No.
So that would be left to the professional standards of the Archdiocese?
That is correct, if it involved the diocesan priest, yes.
And consider the scenario where it involved a member of a religious order. Is it essentially the same? There'd be a reference to the Professional Standards Office?
Not if they're working for us. If they were working for Brisbane Catholic Education, they would come under the same standards and policies and legislation that all of our staff are covered by.
So there would be an investigation conducted by your office in that scenario?
If they were working for us, that's correct.
Would the head of that congregation or that religious institute have some involvement also in handling that complaint?
They would be advised of that complaint by the Executive Director.
So would you expect them in that scenario to also conduct their own investigation, or would that be left to the office, to your office?
As an employee, that would be left to our office, but I'm unable to comment if they would conduct their own investigations after that.
Thank you. And again, a further aspect of the scenario I was putting to Dr. McDonald earlier, and His Honour was asking some questions. If you had a scenario where the matter was being dealt with by the Professional Standards Office within the Archdiocese, say you're dealing with the diocesan priest, if you had concerns about steps that need to be being taken in relation to the priest that weren't being taken, what options are available to you?
It would depend on the actual nature of the complaint. If it was significant and involving the welfare of a student, I'd have no hesitation reporting that priest directly to the police. Again, it would depend on the matter. In addition to that, I would continue to work with both the Executive Director and also the Vicar General and the Archbishop in the management of that matter, in addition to the Queensland Professional Standards Office.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Hill. Mr Elder, can I turn to you, please, and just try and understand the position in Victoria and Melbourne. Now, dealing with the delegations there, as I understand it, the Executive Director of Catholic Education in Melbourne has delegated authority for planning of Catholic education. Is that right?
Correct.
And how does that work as between the different dioceses in Victoria?
So the other diocesan directors have the same remit from their bishop.
Thank you. And you also have a statewide commission, is that right?
Correct.
So that's a joint delegation of the bishops of each diocese and the Archbishop.
Correct.
Thank you. Is the commission's function in Victoria equivalent to what you've heard described in Western Australia and Queensland?
So, yes, around policy, strategy, funding and compliance.
Thank you. And so it generates policies, including in relation to professional standards and reporting?
Correct.
Are they then automatically applied by the individual diocesan officers, or is it a matter of adaptation?
It's a matter of adaptation, but in most instances they're applied as exists by agreement between the directors.
Thank you. Now, in Victoria, you've also had a recent development in the form of child safe standards being required by the Victorian government.
Correct, Ministerial Order 870.
Thank you. And they came into effect on the 1st of January of this year. Is that
Correct,
right?
Mr Free.
Now, can you describe for us what changes, if any, were needed to your policies and complaint handling processes in Melbourne, in the Archdiocese of Melbourne, to comply with Ministerial Order 870?
Yeah. The advantage that Victoria's had is that we had the parliamentary inquiry, which raised the issue of child sexual abuse. We foreshadowed that there would be a number of recommendations coming out of that inquiry, and then, of course, strategically planned because the Royal Commission also was being established. So I got together early on when the state parliamentary inquiry was being undertaken to get my staff to look at everything that was in place in Melbourne and across Victoria to ensure that we were ahead, because we couldn't wait, to ensure that we had some of the best child safe standards that existed. So that's on the basis of how we move forward from that point.
Yes. And in that process, did you identify any particular gaps that needed to be filled?
So there's been a lot of learnings. Part of the learnings that has come out of the Royal Commission engaged us to ensure that we looked at all of the past cases and tried to look at the failings that were undertaken there and to correct procedures both within the office and at a school level that would ensure that some of the mistakes that passed did not continue into the future. So that made us look at our structure. So where I employed, set up the Office of Investigation, Ethics and Professional Standards. I looked at the failings that happened in previous cases whereby the institution was sending out, for example, a teacher to investigate a teacher who had no grounding in law, who had no capacity to gather information that would assist, and I determined that we needed someone more professional in that role. So the last two officers I've had in this role have been senior police who I picked up from federal and Victorian police, because they have the necessary skill set that is required in this office to gather information and understand the law, and also because they have the capacity to engage more closely with people like the Sanyo Task Force and others. So they were learnings. Don't send someone who is ill-equipped to investigate a complaint who hasn't got the skill set that enable them to undertake that. So they're the sorts of things. We set the office, that person reports directly to me, so there is little chance of them having engagement with other people in the office that may want to influence them. I've established it within our office in a separate area that is away from other stuff. Just all those sorts of learnings, Mr. Free.
What about reporting arrangements?
So in Victoria, the Victorian State Government has effectively, I suspect, moved ahead of other states where they've made changes to the Crimes Act 1958, where now there are sanctions against individuals who fail to protect, who fail to disclose, and in respect to grooming. So anyone in Victoria, regardless of whether you are a nurse or a teacher or whatever, anyone above 18 years of age has obligations under the amendments to that Act to report. So our teachers are quite clear through the professional development. On an annual basis, they do an online module that takes about an hour and a half that basically goes through the requirements and their obligations under the law and tells them of what sanctions there are. So in the first instance, they don't report to me. Their obligation is report to police.
Now, that, as I understand it, the obligation under Victorian law is that if it's a child sexual abuse concern, the obligation is to report to police.
Correct.
But if it's a concern about risk of harm, not in relation to child sexual abuse, that's an obligation only to report to the Department of Human Services.
Correct.
Now, you've mentioned that as being the first obligation of teachers and other people in schools. Do they also have an obligation to report it to your office?
They do.
And what's the role of the office then in dealing with that complaint?
So the role of the office is first to establish whether it's being investigated by the police. In some instances, the police have been slow to respond to complaints because of workload, etc. So then we would give advice to the school where there is a suspicion to put the teacher down on pay until the police engage fully in the investigation. So also, I mean, you may have instances where someone, for example, grooming, there's been no test case around grooming. Whilst we give professional development about what grooming looks like, they may want to talk to some professional in my office to determine whether or not they think what's going on within the school is grooming.
Thank you.
So we have the professional officers to support people as they go through that process.
So that's for the purpose of helping inform that person about whether the legal obligation to report has arisen?
Yes.
If it doesn't arise because the view is formed that there is a complaint about some conduct, but it doesn't reach the level of the obligation to report to the police, but it's otherwise of concern. Does your office have any investigative role in dealing with that complaint?
Correct. So the emphasis on the Catholic Education Commission in Victoria and the Catholic Education officers, as you know, we do not employ directly the teachers. They are employed by the parish priest and or the congregations and or the canonical authorities. Sorry.
Go on, please.
Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I
was asking you about what investigations your office would undertake in dealing with a complaint in a scenario where it's not considered to be reportable to the police.
Yeah, okay. So I would then, if my office of a petty office determined that on the face of it they need to investigate, they would seek my advice and, well, actually not seek my advice, they have an automatic remit to investigate. I have a right to also instruct them to investigate because we have a no tolerance level within the Catholic education in Victoria. So there may be a lower standard. If our view is that, and we have terminated the employment of people, particularly a well-known case last year where I engaged with the school and we terminated a teacher who we thought had groomed a student because they had entered into a sexual relationship only a matter of weeks after the end of the school year. We sacked that person. That person then appealed that decision to VCAT and we had to pay them considerable amount of money as a result of our termination of that employment. I spoke to the Minister about fixing the Act to ensure that that didn't happen into the future, and it's now been picked up in the changes to the Crimes Act through grooming.
So the scenario you've described where your office can undertake investigations and then recommend action, and I'll come in a moment if I can to the question of how you do that through the school and the principal, but in that scenario, would that also be the case where the police have investigated the matter and decided not to proceed?
Correct. We have other obligations. See, you need to understand the accountability framework. We're looking here at things in isolation. In Victoria, like in other states, we have the Victorian Institute of Teaching, which is a regulatory body around teachers being licensed. We also have the Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority that actually licenses schools to operate. And within that sits a very tight framework around what are the requirements of the school that it has to meet in respect to its registration to operate a school. Over and above that, we have funding agreements which also put implications on Catholic education commissions and schools to meet their obligations under that funding agreement. And part of that is all legislation. There is the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission that also puts... so you can't look at it in isolation. You actually need to look at the total framework that exists in respect to compliance for Catholic and independent schools and state schools as they exist in Victoria.
Is there a difference in the way you handle child-on-child sexual abuse allegations?
We report those to police as well. Let me tell you, Your Honour, the police are not adept at handling some of those cases. They need to establish better protocols. We had I think, just off the top of my head, allegations made against two 7-year-old boys that they interfered with a 7-year-old girl in their same class. The police put out a press statement saying that this abuse had taken place. It caused pandemonium within the school. We reported it immediately to the police. Half the students didn't turn up the next day. The parents held them back. principal was threatened for allowing it to happen within the school, and after the police investigated, they determined that it had not taken place, but we did refer it to the police in the first instance. But there's a whole lot of protocols that exist around that, which are learnings for the way police handle it through their media department and report it. It ran on the Channel 7 News, I think, as a lead story, and could have had the impact of severely impacting on these two young boys and the girl.
Thank you.
What process inside the school do you have for dealing with that, putting to one side the issue about the age of criminal responsibility?
Yes.
So if you've got 7-year-olds, they don't have criminal responsibility. So what process is there in the school?
Yeah. So you're talking around in respect to curriculum materials that we used within the school. You're talking about how we engage with the parents. Just to get some clarity, Your Honour.
Well, let's start with the parents.
Yeah. Okay. So the protocols that have been set down by the Victorian State Government, which I think basically mirror the 10 elements that you put down in your paper on the 10th of July. And I got my people to look at that very good paper that the Royal Commission put down to determine whether or not the 7 protocols as enunciated under Ministerial Order 870 matched. And the advice back from my staff was that they absolutely do. So part of those protocols is around the engagement with parents. So it's quite clear that is designed to pick up an engagement with a child, an engagement with a parent, an engagement with the school and the school community as part of the protocols. That is what they capture.
And I assume incorporated into that engagement is also engagement with experts who are able to assist and guide in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I have in each of our schools funded centrally a student, all primary and secondary, a student wellbeing person who has expertise in this particular area. And that's centrally funded. So they are able to, because of their expertise, engage psychs and others to come in and support the school. Our professional development has also looked at bringing professionals in at that macro level to engage. Professor Stephen Smallbone and others have come in, but also we've developed a whole lot of other material that exists below that, which we use at the school level.
Could I just ask, in Victoria, given that you have different diocesan CEOs, is there a consistent approach to dealing with the issues that Her Honour's just raised with you? Is there a centralised advice service to all of the dioceses across Victoria, or is there the possibility that you have some inconsistent approaches across the various dioceses?
Okay, so at the macro level there is a consistent approach because we've set up, right back when the Royal Commission was established, a working party across all dioceses, which sits under the Catholic Education Commission of Victoria. Where the nuances existed, I determined to employ police to undertake investigations. They may employ a lawyer or someone else. So they're the different nuances. So in the main, they are absolutely consistent. Operationally, there may be nuances that don't undermine the policy.
Can I just ask on that topic, firstly, Dr McDonald, what arrangements are in place in the Western Australian office to deal with the particular issue of child-on-child incidents?
Yes, thank you. The historical 2016, one of the lessons out of the Royal Commission was what is our child safe framework? What's our approach to ensuring that our schools are child safe? To the reviewing of the files in 2012, we employed a child safety person to run the project, and throughout 2016 we developed a child safety framework for Catholic Ed Western Australia, and obviously used the July document creating child safe institutions. Similar to Victoria, we've mapped those to our document to make sure that we've covered all the elements. And really the work now for 217 is embedding that right across the whole state. And I think the challenge, Mr. Free, is that this is a cultural shift. This is changing in culture. It's more around professional behaviours and healthy relationships more so than looking at intent and labelling. To that end, we've developed a code of conduct that we're required under our system agreement, but we've gone beyond the compliance to have a look at, and again, Stephen mentioned Professor Smallbone, using the evidence there around our code of conduct, which is around healthy behaviours, is for the whole school community. So it's parents, teachers and students, because we would like our students to see modelled in the school healthy relationships and also understand what a healthy relationship is so that they can also have healthy relationships with each other and also post-school. So there's a professional learning element in the Child Safe framework, and part of that is, again, coming out of that review of files, we have a number of cases that were in Western Australia and also cases out of the Royal Commission. We have recognised that, and it's an assumption, that the teacher's world is in the classroom. Their understanding of what they do and how they learn is classroom-based. And so what we've tried to do, rather than, yes, there's a theoretical component, yes, there's understanding around child protection, we need the knowledge base, but we've developed a simulator, which is a classroom that has a number of posts or elements in the classroom of our cases. All our early career teachers in the first 3 years go through the simulator, and then also people in our leadership programs go through the simulator, so that they're discussion points as to, could be all the windows are covered with artwork. It looks wonderful, but probably might not be the safest. We'll have some of the excerpts from what we had out of the Royal Commission. We'll have a Bible open because none of those things will happen here, and so we use that as a conversation piece around it. So we're trying to make it as practical as possible, but evidence-based on our scenarios. So we're trying to build the capacity off the ground up of all staff as well as our leaders.
Thank you. So just to clarify, if you had an incident in one of the schools in Western Australia involving a complaint of a child engaging in sexual abuse of another child, is that something that your office would become involved in?
Yes, and link up with the Child Protection Family Services, CPFS, and also the police.
Thank you. Mr Hill, can you tell us a little about what arrangements would apply in Brisbane in relation to child-on-child incidents?
Mr Freer, and if I could just preface my comments by saying we've got students in our schools that range from the age of about 5 to 18 years. And first and foremost, if a student is 18 years of age, in one of our colleges, they're still treated as a student, and so our usual protocols would apply. The other thing worth mentioning is that we've done a great deal of training with our staff. So there is online training that all of our staff would undergo. It's about a 2-hour online module. There's additional training that we would do with our principals that's beyond that. And then we also have student protection contacts in each of our school. So when it comes to student-related matter, one of the things that we've tried to do as part of that training is introduce a traffic light system, essentially green being it's healthy and part of the normal natural development of a child at its particular journey of life. Amber being of some concerns, there might be some flags there, and red being very serious and needs to be taking immediate action. In addition to that, we've introduced the Daniel Morcombe Child Safety Curriculum to assist teachers with the management of these issues in terms of talking about these things in terms of protective student behaviours with their students. We have guidance counsellors in each of our schools and colleges to assist both staff and the students with discussing these types of matters. We've also running at the moment a sexuality project and a student voice project.
And if an incident did arise of this kind, is that something that your office would become involved in responding to?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Mr Crowley, can you tell us what arrangements apply at your school and in the Ballarat Diocese in relation to child-on-child incidents?
Certainly would involve close contact with parents, so having conversations with parents, bringing them in, having a chat with them, with our child support wellbeing team, and also linking those conversations directly in with the police. So bringing the police into the conversation, getting advice on how we should approach it with parents. Following that advice, they would perhaps give us a direction in terms of additional conversations that we need to follow up with parents with, but we would certainly, our first port of call would be the parent and then the police as part of that conversation that involves a number of voices there to give that expertise.
Would you involve the Catholic Education Office from Ballarat?
Yes, we would let them know.
Would you expect them to then take an active role or leave it to you?
No, they would be aware of it, but they would be updated on how that was going, but they would be leaving that to the school to work through in conjunction with the police and with the parents.
Thank you. Mr. Elder, can I just come back to you and you were talking a little earlier about a particular scenario in which you concluded a teacher ought to be dismissed. Now, we'll deal with this topic in a little more detail later, but the arrangement is that the employer of that teacher would have been the parish priest, is that right?
No, the employer at that time, I think, was one of our secondary colleges.
Thank you.
Because it was a girl who had completed her VCE and the engagement with the teacher commenced shortly after that.
Thank you. Does that then mean the decision lies with who was the responsible canonical authority for that college?
I'm just trying to think which school it was. I think it was one that had some canonical administrators.
So the authority lies with them, is that right?
Yeah, so you need to understand we have a top-down approach in Victoria. The state government has a compliance framework that ranges from legislation, ministerial orders, MOUs or whatever. And so the school's power is limited in that if I spoke to them and said, this person should be terminated. I mean, let me tell you, they made that determination, which I supported, and they did not. Then I have the power to take it externally to the Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority as part of our compliance regime with them for the licensing of our schools. The determination would then be made by them as to whether or not there was just cause to instruct the school to do it and or they may lose their licence.
So the effective authority that body has is control over the registration of the teacher, is that right?
Correct.
But the employment relationship, the power to terminate, is with the canonical administrators in that scenario?
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. So it's really a lever that one can use to help persuade them that they should terminate the employment.
Correct. It is a strong power because it is taking it from outside the church to an independent state government body where they have a compliance back to them through the Commission.
Thank you. And when you talked before about frameworks of accountability, is it part of your remit in the office to ensure that the schools continue to comply with funding conditions, for instance?
Well, it's not only funding because the Victorian... So, I mean, this is something that seems to somewhat be missed when we're looking at governance and accountability frameworks. So it's not just about finance. The Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority, they have to undertake an annual review. The annual review is not only against finance, but the annual review is also against a whole lot of other things, of which one is compliance against the Child Safe Standards. So it's almost a double checking.
Yes.
Is that an audit or a desk-type review?
Okay. Yeah, okay.
And I asked the question deliberately because Queensland, we discovered, had a system of ticking boxes, you might say, rather than actually affirming the quality of what was happening.
Yeah. It's a good point, Your Honour, because, and you're absolutely on the money, So the VRQA does a random audit where they undertake an external audit of 10% of all schools. My office, as part of our accountability framework, undertakes an audit of 25% of our schools. So schools actually understand that it will be a fair chance that either the VRQA, Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority, will undertake an audit against the standards and or the Catholic Education Office Melbourne will undertake that audit on behalf of the Commission. So it's a good point. So there's a probability of 35% of schools being audited annually. Our principals also have to, and it's even deeper than that. Our principals, as John will probably tell you, have to sign a statutory declaration that his school meets those standards on an annual basis. So the bar has gone from there to effectively there as a result of the community's understanding through the Royal Commission and the State Parliamentary Inquiry that the accountability framework is now quite strong and the bar has been lifted significantly.
What's the position in the Archdiocese of Melbourne in terms of priests and religious in schools? Are they used as teachers or in any other capacity?
I don't know of any priests that are used as teachers, so I can't categorically say, but my view is that I don't think there would be any, in the sense that they may come into the school and engage on a not-for-payment basis in respect to preparation for sacraments.
Yes.
But again, it's not like historically had happened where Father would ring up and say, send those going over to the presbytery. Our teachers understand their duty of care, that at all times, the students, whether it be a priest, whether it be a volunteer, whether it be a parent who's coming into the school, that the duty of care rests with the teacher and that line of sight is always what is prominent in that external engagement.
And what about religious in the schools?
Relatively few, but I think I'll confirm this. I think we have two religious principals within our schools, but the religious fundamentally are looking more at a governance role now rather than an active engagement. But I have the statistics on how many nuns and brothers are teaching directly in our school, which I'm happy to provide to you.
Mr. Elder, you know, of course, that we looked at the Searson problem.
Yes, Your Honour.
No doubt you've looked at it too.
To get the learnings, Your Honour, absolutely.
Well, one of the fundamental learnings there was that your office didn't have the authority effectively in practice as against the parish priest.
So, do you want to engage in a discussion?
We'll probably come back to it after the adjournment, but it's a real issue, isn't it?
Your Honour, what happened then is not identical to what the position is at the moment. And this is another point, that not always do child abuse become evident in the first instance. One of the things that happened at Doveton, from my recollection, is that it has started off as an industrial issue. That is, the principal and the parish priest were at loggerheads over a whole lot of things, and so it then transpired further to that, when they started the investigation, that there was more to it than just the industrial matter, that is the engagement between the teacher, the principal and the parish priest around expenditure of money, etc., etc. Where the Catholic Education Office failed, and I say this because we're looking at a different time, but they sent out a teacher who, as I said, did not have the necessary skills to investigate, did not understand the legal position. But there was still a moral obligation on the people in that school to report if they believed that a child was being sexually abused. But the officer's greatest mistake, in hindsight, and you know it's always better with hindsight, is the person they set out to investigate. Teacher investigating teacher doesn't cut it today. You actually need someone with a higher skill set than that person to undertake that role.
Mr Elder, I think that probably misses the real issue, which was the parish priest, being the employer, had the power over the employees in the school. And as a consequence, the process of reporting and disciplining and dealing with the problem was compromised. That was the real issue.
The issue that you're saying is that there was an unfair balance of power.
Not an unfair balance of power. The teachers, the education component of the diocese, didn't control the school as against the parish priest. That was the ultimate problem, but perhaps we should come back to it after the adjournment.
It'd be good to have that discussion, Your Honour.
Very well, we'll take the adjournment.
All stand.